Hello YouTube, this is Sam Gerrans from Qur'anite.com. Today is Tuesday the 30th of April 2019, and today I'd like to look at the subject of staying calm, reasoned, analytical and objective when confronted with what we call in Russian pыл в глаза, it's sort of dust in the eyes, regarding claims made by all kinds of people to do with the Qur'an. Now, much of my life is connected with researching the Qur'an and dealing with its contents, but also as a part of that, obviously one engages with ideas asserted by other camps. And I'm not really going to get into too much into the specifics of various polemics, but you have all of the sort of answering Islam people, and in fact you can find some quite useful information on the Answering Islam site, because in some areas they're absolutely right, and then you have certain Christian apologists, and they have their particular perspective, and then there's a Jewish perspective, and then there's the secular perspectives upon perspectives. The Quran calls us to consider it with care, and for my part, that's what I do. It doesn't mean that I mean, the Quran also says, if you could bring something better than it, I would follow it. And that remains my position. I mean, it's not a matter of just holding on to something, saying, this is what I believe, and closing your eyes and never looking at anything else. We're either interested in truth or we're not interested in truth. And if that's my position anyway. However, in the smorgasbord of ideas, of competing ideas out there, one will come across all kinds of arguments made from positions with all kinds of different agendas regarding the Qur'an. In this case, in fact, regarding all kinds of things, regarding rabbinic Judaism, regarding Pentecostalism, whatever it is. But in this case, we're talking about the Qur'an. Now, as I say, in my work, often I have to encounter some of these things. Quite a lot of it now. I've just been doing this for so long. I kind of know what it is, and I've already looked into it, and I can ignore a lot of it. But every now and then, and I'm sure for people who don't spend as much time with the text that I have, it's very easy to get pulled about. And I had it's not exactly an experience, but I came across an assertion that I hadn't come across before a few days ago. I can give you some of the details of it, I suppose, but that isn't really the main point. I really want to talk about the concept of it. This is a Christian assertion. If I can find it, I'll put the link down below, which I hadn't come across before. The bones of which is they're trying to insinuate that the story of Ibrahim, where Ibrahim is in the Qur'an, Abraham is thrown into the fire, that this is essentially this is a Talmudic story, a Jewish story, and therefore Muhammad was a false prophet, etc., etc., etc. Now, I've heard lots of different versions of the same thing. Equivalent versions of the same thing will be often Christian claims about the story of what they call the seven sleepers of Ephesus. It's Al-Kahf in the Qur'an, the cave. And this has been taken from other stories, and this is an assertion, and it is a superficial assertion. It's effective upon people who haven't done their due diligence and who look to leaders to tell them what to think and won't do their own thinking. The Qur'an itself says that we should consider the Qur'an with care. It also states that people reject the Qur'an without having understood even a tenth of it. And the other point is that it says that that it is a confirmation of previous scriptures, but it is also a control over them. And it's the second part of this which people forget about. What often happens is, and what one should be careful of, all of us, is assuming conclusions. But I suppose it's in the nature of man, isn't it, to feel a sort of an ownership and almost a unity with one's opinions, because one's opinions become so much a part of who one is. It's difficult, especially if you've been brought up in it or you've paid a high price to reach those conclusions, whatever it is, to be objective about them. And I think that the Qur'an allows for this. It certainly doesn't claim that all all Jews should abandon Judaism. It doesn't require all Christians to abandon Christianity. What the Quran calls the Jews to, incidentally, Bani Israel, actually, is to follow what they have from God, and also with the Christians. And it does reprove them on certain points, the Christians not to make claims about the Trinity, and the Bani Israel not to make racial claims for their own superiority and exclusivity. Outside of that, they're absolutely welcome, and in fact encouraged to follow their own traditions, because human beings are made in a way that we are naturally, we belong to communities and cultures and so on. And I think that it seems to me anyway that God is sympathetic to that. However, we should remain open, but the point I'm going to make here is not absolutely open, or at least with certain caveats. Going briefly through this presentation, as I say, this Christian apologist, Luke something I believe his name is, he quotes Surah 21, 51 through 71, where Ibrahim sort of exposes the false god of the community and is thrown into the fire and so on. Then he brings something from a midrash, and which is actually not very much like the story at all. Then he says that the Muslim says that the Qur'an's account is totally independent of such Jewish sources, but that these sources exist because the story is in fact true and they represent a stream of Jewish historical memory of the event. And then he goes, I'm not going to go through the whole argument because that isn't really the point. The point is that he makes an argument which is superficially impressive until you go through it carefully. And in this day and age, where there's so much information, people are not really reading carefully. They're scan reading, and they're gaining impressions rather than information and knowledge, and certainly rather than wisdom. It's very easy to kind of think, I didn't know that. And it becomes, it's easy to get sort of blown about by every wind of doctrine, as it were, to use a Christianism. I read this through, I thought about it, over the course of the day, doing other things, thought about it some more. And then I came back to it, and I went through this particular article very carefully and analysed its arguments, looked at its sources, looked at what it's actually doing. I mean, if you decide to go through the argument, what he's claiming, actually, if you go through it carefully, is that it's like this story, but not like it. And in fact, his only actual fact, if you go through the whole thing, is a similarity in the Hebrew between the word or yor, which is light in Hebrew, and which he assumes to be the name of the place, from the book of Genesis as we have it today. This is the name of the city of the origin of Ibrahim, although nowhere is that mentioned in the Qur'an. So what he's actually done is he started with his own conclusions. His own conclusions are that the Hebrew scriptures are perfect and correct, firstly. Secondly, he's also picked up a few factoids which are partly incorrect about the Hebrew language. And then he's put together a sort of a dust ball to throw at people who know nothing about the Hebrew language, to do with the voweling and so on, which may or may not be the case. And then he's assumed his conclusion and then retrospectively attached the motivations that he sees in those conclusions to the assumption in his own mind that the Qur'an was written by Muhammad, who got this knowledge from somewhere. If you go through it, carefully, you find that it's actually a very weak argument, and it's cobbled together with sellotape and blue tack. My point is not to attack this particular argument. I don't really care. My point is that anyone who studies the Quran, we are going to come engage in this sort of thing all the time. What I would say is that, for myself, with the Quran, I've probably spent, I estimate around 10,000 hours studying this book with care. And I have personally got to points with it many times where you reach something and you think, and it seems to be, what does this mean? Especially if you know what the hadith people say it means. I've been personally amazed over and over again if you continue to study and not assume your conclusions and remain open, not open like like sort of like a field, but you retain your center, you retain your core, but you're not dogmatic in the way that you deal with the information. And ask God to guide you, but study and look around without, to consider the opposing point of view without feeling emotionally buffeted or oppressed by it, and just set it at one step removed and go through calmly the data and really analyze it. And I've personally found with unerring regularity that you will uncover a new layer that was there all the time. And over time, what's happened to me is my confidence in this book has just built up and built up and built up because of my repeated experience of it surprising me and confirming its own veracity to me through study, through considering it with care. So my main point is, it's like a friend. Let's say that you have a friend, a very close friend, and okay, if the friendship's just begun, then perhaps things are a little bit more fragile. But let's say you've known this friend for 10 years, and over the last 10 years, let's say 150 times, this friend has come through for you. Even, against all the odds, he's surprised you and been absolutely consistent in his reliability and in his friendship. Then something happens and somebody says to you, no, this is not a true friend, this is a false friend. Obviously, one should not be blinded to facts. However, if you've built up this history with this friend of this friend being true, then it really behooves one to approach any criticisms, certainly have a look at them, but to have a look at them from the point of view of they have everything to prove. And with a lot of the apologetics out there, for example, this particular essay, and I'm not going to go through it line by line because it's not, what I did was I took his article, I copied and pasted it into a Word document. I went through it line by line, and then I wrote in red my own notes, actually analysing what he's doing with the argument. Because a lot of people won't notice it. And for example, he uses expressions like, it is actually fairly clear here, and some people would say, and it follows that. Nothing follows. It follows only if you're not following. If you're not following, then you might think it follows, but the things that he says follows don't follow at all. And his actual argument is infinitesimally small, although it makes these large emotional claims. And I think this is true for life in general. We are, we're men, we're adults now. It's not a matter of just being thrown about with everything that comes along. When some big claim comes along, you have to, you should make allowance for it. It's a bit like the poem by Rudyard Kipling. You trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. And I think that this is really the core of it. This is where you acquire your, in Russian the word is stержень, your sort of center, your core, and holding on to that. Sure, you can look at these arguments, but because we're all pulled around by so much information now, and when people are reading information or taking it in through videos and so on, a lot of it's very superficial, a lot of it's dealing in emotions. One really needs to sort of stand back, especially if it's dealing with, in my case, with the Qur'an, and say, what is the actual argument here? Not what does the argument feel like, but what is it actually saying? You have to get quite legalistic with it. And so what I'm advising is that when you come across these sorts of things, it's not to say that, no, you should test. You should test. If the Qur'an is true, it will stand up to it. And if it's not, why would you follow it? However, what I would advise doing is putting these sorts of things into a tray on your desk which says, I'm going to look at this calmly and coolly and base my reaction to it on a proper understanding of both the argument and what the Qur'an actually says, and then move forward on that basis. And I found for myself over however many years it's been now that the Qur'an has always justified the confidence. It's always come through with newer levels of understanding, and quite often these types of quote unquote challenge actually provide us with an opportunity to grow and learn. So then they're not necessarily bad things. I think arguing with these types of apologists, this sort of, if you actually break down the argument that this chap's using, he's not interested at all in actually learning anything. What he's actually interested in is bringing over to his side people who think they are Muslims but don't really know the Qur'an, and compounding and sort of solidifying his own base within the people that with his own audience. For me, and for anybody who's serious-minded, I think you have to do your own due diligence. But just because somebody's clever with words and superficially might appear to have some argument, and you go, oh, no, it can't be true. If you've known this book for so long, and if you've seen its truth for so long, it's fitting to say, okay, well, I'm going to put this on my desk and come to it in a calm frame of mind and really look at its arguments, and then see where you are after that. And I assure you, well, I can certainly say with confidence that my experience has been, over time, when you go through these cycles of challenge, analysis, and then coming out the other side with knowledge, you build up. This is where real faith comes, because you've got the experience of it. And so I'm not saying at all, don't look at these evil people. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying understand that these people have an agenda, and look at their arguments carefully. If you're going to look at them, go through them like you would a contract. If this was a house contract or a business deal, how carefully would you go through it? It's not just a matter of a few feelings here and a few feelings there. If you're going to take on the argument, then go through it and then see where you are after it. And the Qur'an claims to be the best hadith. It claims to be the best story, the best narration. It claims to be from God. It claims to be perfect. It doesn't claim that it's going to spawn a religion, which, like we have today. It calls itself Islam, but, we don't find this religion in this book. We're talking about this book. And do your own research. But allowing this emotional kind of argument to allow a sort of rot to set into your foundation, I think you'll find that it will eat away and eat away and eat away. And that's the really much of the part, the point of it. It's designed to have an emotional effect. Because let's take it, I will link to this article below, but if you go through it on its actual contents, you'll see that its argument is actually fatuous. And I'm not saying that to name call, it's true. And it turns really on one key factoid, which itself requires that the people reading it know nothing about, in this case, Hebrew, which I would be pretty sure the person speaking knows nothing about Hebrew. And also, considering the larger picture, this is directed at the stupid Muslims, this particular one. He wouldn't direct this at the more intelligent Jews, because the Jews would hand him his head on a plate with this kind of argument. So you understand who the audience is, what the intention is, what the actual argument is. if you're gonna engage with it, break it all down, and you'll often find, in fact, I have found with, as I say, in unerring regularity, that the argument actually is weak, and it exposes it for what it is. And you understand that each time that the Qur'an, this is from God. It is preserved, and it will be ignored by most people. And it is, to my mind, the greatest blessing that we have a guidance that is preserved and which stands up to proper analysis. But it doesn't stand up to an analysis where all the conclusions are assumed for you by people who've got their own agendas. You have to you have to be like a lawyer, and if you're going to get into it, but don't skim read, have a feeling, and then go and cry in a corner, because that's not doing your due diligence or your research. Anyway, that's all for now. If you're listening on YouTube, you can download my full translation of the Qur'an free using the button in the top right hand corner, or buy the hard copy there at 10% less than on Amazon. I also encourage you to sign up for the Qur'anite Plus newsletter on the site to get occasional micro updates. You can download the audio from my YouTube videos to your mobile device using the links in the drop down below. I recommend meetquranites.com to connect with other Qur'an alone believers. Like if you like, comment if you have something constructive to say, and subscribe to get more each week. And use the link in the drop down below to donate if you would like to help me keep doing this. And remember, this life is short, eternity is long. If you want good trees, plant good seeds.